Okay, let's kick things off today with a bit of a thought experiment. It is a little bit of a mind bender, actually, so I need you to stay with me here.
Mm.
I want you to imagine a scenario. You have a brother,
Okay, I'm picturing it.
like a long-lost brother, let's say,
Right.
and you completely know he exists. This isn't just some vague family rumor. You have the actual paperwork.
Like a birth certificate.
Exactly. You've got his birth certificate.
Yeah.
You know his name is Orestes. You know for an absolute fact, logic dictates, I have a brother.
Okay, I'm following. So the existence of the brother is just an established fact.
Right, so you know the fact of him, but then a man walks into the room. He stands right in front of you. You look him up and down, but nothing happens.
No spark of recognition.
Zero. You have absolutely no idea that this specific guy standing right there is the brother you know exists.
Yeah, it's a haunting scenario, and it's actually a really classic philosophical setup. This is what philosophers call the Electra paradox.
The Electra paradox.
Yes, from the old Greek tragedy. So Electra knows her brother Orestes exists. She knows the relationship is real. But when he is standing literally right there in front of her, she doesn't realize that that man is Orestes.
Huh.
She knows the fact of the brother, but she just can't identify the person.
And that disconnect, that frustrating gap between knowing that someone exists versus actually being able to identify them in a lineup, that is exactly where we are going today on this deep dive. But we aren't talking about long-lost brothers.
You know, we're taking a much bigger leap.
We are talking about God.
It is a massive leap, but a really necessary one. We are diving into a pretty heavy-hitting paper today by Professor Tennyson Samraj. It's titled The Essence of God and the Identity of God. And the central tension here is exactly what you just described with Electra.
Which is what exactly? Break that down for us.
Well, it's the idea that we might be able to use logic to prove that a God exists, so that's the essence, but that is completely different from being able to actually identify God, which is the identity.
Okay, so the mission for our deep dive today is to figure out why knowing about God is not the same thing as identifying God. And honestly, why Professor Samraj thinks this specific distinction changes pretty much everything about how we view belief, logic, and even atheism.
It really does challenge the very foundation of what we think proof even is.
Well, let's get into the heavy lifting early, because I was reading through the source material, and Samraj throws around these two Latin terms right at the beginning, didicto and dere. Now, usually when I see Latin in a philosophy paper, my eyes just glaze over and I start looking for the exit.
I get that, yeah.
But this seems crucial. You really have to break this down for us.
It is totally crucial. And honestly, do not let the Latin scare you. It's actually quite intuitive once you get past the terminology itself. So didicto literally means about the statement or about the dictum.
Okay, about the statement.
Right. It refers to when you believe that a proposition is true, but you don't necessarily have a specific individual in mind at all.
Okay, give me a real-world example, like not a philosophical one.
Sure, let's do sports. Imagine a race. The Olympics, 100-meter dash. You haven't seen the results yet. You didn't watch it live on TV. But you know how races work.
Yeah.
So you can safely say, I believe the fastest runner won the race.
Okay, that's a totally sound logical assumption. I believe the statement, the fastest runner won, is true.
Exactly. That is a didicto belief. You believe the statement is true, whoever the winner might actually be. You don't know if it's an American, a Jamaican, or a Canadian. You just know the statement holds up.
Right. I don't know who it is, just that the statement is correct.
Exactly. Now, on the other hand, dere means about the thing or about the object. This is when your belief is attached to a specific identifiable entity.
Okay.
So if you say, I believe Usain Bolt won the race, that is a dere belief.
Because I'm pointing at a specific guy.
Yes. You aren't just trusting some logical statement regarding fastest runners anymore. You are identifying a specific person, Usain Bolt, and attaching the victory directly to him. You've moved from the general to the specific.
Okay, I think I see the difference. One is believing in a logic like the fastest runner wins. The other is believing in a person Usain Bolt wins. It's almost like saying, I believe someone won the lottery versus I believe Bob won the lottery.
That's a perfect analogy. The first one is almost statistically guaranteed. The second one actually requires hard evidence about Bob.
So how does Samraj apply this to God? Because this really feels like a setup.
Oh, it absolutely is. Samraj argues that almost all of our logical arguments for God are didicto.
Meaning they're just about the statement.
Right. We look at the universe, we see cause and effect, and we say, well, there must be a creator, or there must be an uncaused cause.
Because logically, you can't have an infinite line of falling dominoes. Something had to push the very first one. That's just physics, basically.
Precisely. So we believe the statement a creator exists is true. That's de dicto. But, and this is the massive catch here that doesn't allow us to make a de re claim.
Meaning we can't actually identify who pushed the domino?
Right. We can't point to a specific being and say, that one right there, that is the creator. We lack the identification. We are exactly like the person knowing someone won the lottery, but having absolutely no idea who actually holds the ticket.
So wait, hang on. What does this all mean for the listener then? It sounds like you're saying I can be totally convinced that God exists logically without having a single clue who God actually is.
That is exactly the point. You can believe that God exists without knowing God's identity. It's right back to the Electra paradox.
Right, the brother.
Yeah. You know there is a brother, or in this case, a creator. But if he walked into the room, you simply wouldn't have the data to recognize him.
That feels a bit unsettling, doesn't it? Like, we really want to think if we saw the divine, we'd just know. It would be obvious to us.
It's human nature to want that certainty.
But Samraj is saying, no, you wouldn't. And he uses some really interesting analogies to back this up in the paper. He talks about water and gold.
Yes, he draws heavily on the work of the philosopher Saul Kripke here. Kripke talks about something called a posteriori necessity. It sounds super complex, but it's really just about how we rigorously define identity. Think about water.
Okay, water. The clear stuff in my glass right now.
Right, for centuries, for most of human history, honestly, what was water to us?
It's the wet stuff. It's clear, it quenches your thirst, it falls from the sky as rain.
Exactly. But those are just descriptions. They tell you what water does or what it looks like. But Kripke argues that isn't its true identity. Imagine we travel to a twin Earth.
Okay, sci-fi hypothetical. I like it.
We find a liquid there, it's clear, it's wet, it quenches thirst perfectly, but when we put it under a microscope, it's not H2O, it's some complex chemical chain called XYZ. Is it water?
Well, if it tastes like water and looks like water, wouldn't we just call it water?
In casual conversation, sure, maybe, but chemically, scientifically, no. If it's not H2O, it's simply not water, it's an imposter, it's fake water.
Okay, I see. H2O is the identity. It's the recipe, 2 hydrogens, 1 oxygen.
And Kripke argues that water is H2O is true in all possible worlds. It is a completely rigid identity. Once we discovered that molecular structure, we locked in what water essentially is.
We found its ID card.
Correct. Now, apply that standard to God. Samraj compares God to gold. We know exactly what gold is because we have its atomic number, 79.
Right.
We have specific data points. We have its melting point, its atomic weight. If you hand me a yellow rock, I can test it in a lab.
Right. If its atomic number is 79, I'm rich. If it's iron pyrite, I'm an idiot holding fool's gold.
Exactly. But for God, we have no atomic number, we have no DNA, we have no specific empirical data points.
So if a glowing being appeared right now in the studio, floated 3 feet off the ground, and said, I am the Lord, I couldn't just take a blood sample to check.
You couldn't. You have absolutely no baseline to compare it to. We simply lack the specificity.
Yeah.
So Samraj argues that God is like gold in that he is definable. We can define him as the creator or the all-powerful.
But unlike gold, he is not identifiable.
Because we can't test for him.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that is the huge gap. Without that specific data, what Kripke calls specificity, we cannot verify God's identity even if he appeared right in front of us.
We are just stuck with the de dicto belief, knowing there's a God without the de rever ability to actually identify him.
Man, this brings up a huge issue with how we use logic. I love a good logical argument. I think a lot of our listeners probably find comfort in the idea that you can sort of reason your way to God.
People do rely on that a lot.
But Samraj seems to be putting a ceiling on how high logic can actually take us.
He really is. And he deconstructs this brilliantly. He starts with one of the most famous questions in all of philosophy posed by Leibniz. Why is there something rather than nothing?
It's the ultimate question. Why is there a universe at all? Why aren't we just sitting in a void?
Right. And usually we answer this with causality, you know, the chair maker analogy.
Oh, sure. I know this one well.
Right.
If I walk into a room and see a chair, I know there was a chair maker. Chairs don't just pop into existence out of thin air.
Right.
If there is a painting, there was a painter. If there is a universe, there was a universe maker.
It's a very sound, logical chain. It leads us directly to the necessity of an uncaused cause. Something that started it all, but didn't need to be started itself.
Yeah.
But here's where it gets really interesting. And honestly, this is where Samraj drops a bit of a bomb. He calls it the monotheism trap.
A trap. That sounds ominous.
It's a trap because we leap way too far. Logic can absolutely prove that an uncaused cause exists. but logic cannot prove that there is only one of them.
Whoa. Wait, hang on a second. I think most people assume God just equals one God. Isn't that the default setting for everyone?
That's a theological assumption. It's not a logical conclusion. Samraj argues that proving God exists as an uncaused cause does not prove monotheism at all. Think about your chairmaker analogy again.
Okay. I see a chair. I know there's a chair maker.
Does the existence of the chair prove that only one single person made it?
No, I guess not. It could have been a team. It could have been a factory with 100 workers on an assembly line.
Exactly. Or, looking at a huge parking lot full of cars, does the fact that they are all cars prove they all came from the exact same factory?
No. There's Ford, Toyota, Honda.
Precisely. Logic just demands a cause. It doesn't demand a singular cause. Why couldn't there be 2 uncaused causes? Or 5?
Right.
To say there is only one requires actual identification. You have to be able to identify the being to count them.
That is a wild thought. I never really considered that pure logic allows for a whole committee of gods.
It completely does. Logic gets us to an eternal mind or a force, but it definitely doesn't get us to the Lord our God is one. That claim monotheism requires specific identity. It requires degree knowledge.
So logic takes you to the door of the building, proves someone is inside, but it can't tell you if it's one guy or a whole football team.
That is a perfect way to put it. Without revelation or specific identification, logic just leaves us with a generic creator slot that could easily be filled by one being or many.
So naturally, people stop relying on pure logic, and they turn to religion. They turn to the Bible, the Quran, the Vedas. Surely those sources solve this, right? I mean, that's the whole point of revelation, to reveal the identity.
You would certainly think so. We assume the Bible is the ID card, but Samraj takes a very bold stance here. He argues that even the sacred texts failed to provide the kind of identification we are talking about.
Really? But the Bible is full of descriptions. God is love, God is just, God is a consuming fire. Those sound like solid identifiers to me.
They are descriptions, yes, attributes, yes, but they are not biometric data. It's not empirical identification. Samraj points to the ancient philosopher Epicurus here.
Okay, what did he say?
Epicurus claimed there is really only one attribute we can be absolutely certain of regarding God: immortality.
Being without beginning and without end.
Right, and the sacred texts confirm this. They tell us God exists and that God is immortal. But does that really help you pick God out of a lineup?
If I'm being honest, no. If 3 glowing, immortal beings walked into the room right now, the Bible doesn't give me a fingerprint scanner to check which one is the real God.
Exactly. The texts tell us about God again, de dicto, but they don't provide the empirical data to identify the reality of God in any physical, verifiable sense.
It's like having a police sketch versus a DNA sample. The Bible gives a sketch, he looks kind of like this, acts like this, but it doesn't give us the actual DNA.
Yes, and Samraj notes that even when we talk about being made in the image of God, we tend to get confused. We often think this means we physically look like God.
Right, like the Sistine Chapel painting. Old man with a white beard, Adam with a beard.
But logically, we are biological, finite, mortal creatures. God is likely non-physical, infinite, immortal. So the image isn't a physical resemblance at all. It's much more likely about consciousness, rationality, or morality.
Which again doesn't help me identify him physically. If God is just consciousness, that's not a face I can recognize on the street.
Yeah, exactly. What about that internal feeling, though? You know, John Calvin talked about the sensus divinitatis, the sense of the divine.
Oh, right, that internal knowing. Like people say, I just know it in my soul. Isn't that a form of identification?
That's a great point. Calvin argued we might be created to inherently know God, like a built-in antenna for the divine frequency. But Summers argues that this sense is still just an awareness of existence, not identity. It tells you that God is there, but not who God is specifically.
It's like hearing a hum in the room. I know the humidifier is turned on. My sense tells me it's there. But I can't tell you the brand name or the serial number just by listening to the hum.
That's a perfect analogy. You sense the presence, but you can't verify the identity.
Yeah.
So we are left with this profound silence. The sources, the logic, the internal sense, they all point to existence. They all scream that someone is there, but they completely refuse to give us the ID card.
So where does that actually leave the believer? Because honestly, this sounds kind of bleak. We've got this huge gap. We can define God as an uncaused cause, immortal, but we can't identify him. We don't have the H2O formula for the divine. It feels like we're standing on the edge of a cliff here. If we can't prove who God is, isn't that a massive failure of the system?
And that is exactly where the pivot happens. This is the big existential turn. Samraj argues that this so-called failure is actually the most important feature of the entire system.
How so?
If we cannot have empirical proof of identity, then belief cannot be a simple matter of fact. It must be a matter of choice. Samraj calls this a belief decision.
A belief decision. Explain that a bit more.
Because the identity is hidden from us, you are forced to make a conscious decision. Think about it. If God stood in front of you and we had the DNA test to prove it was him, believing wouldn't be a choice anymore. It would just be acknowledging a plain fact.
Like saying the sky is blue, or fire is hot, or this is God.
Right. It would be exactly like believing in the sun. You don't choose to believe in the sun when you step outside in July. It's just there, burning your retinas. You have absolutely no say in the matter.
So the ambiguity, the lack of an ID card, that's what actually creates the space for free will.
Exactly. The lack of identity creates the space for human freedom. This brings in Søren Kierkegaard. He talked about the either-or. Because the objective proof is missing, the individual is forced to jump. You either believe or you don't. The uncertainty is the very thing that makes the leap of faith possible.
That's actually kind of beautiful. If it were proven, it wouldn't be faith at all. It would just be science.
Precisely. If you have proof, you don't need faith. You only need faith when the identity is obscured. And we can really wrap this part of the discussion up with Martin Buber, the Jewish philosopher. He wrote the famous book, I and Thou.
I and thou, me and you.
Right. Buber focused heavily on the relational aspect. He argues that we can recognize a relationship who each is to each other, even without any empirical identification.
Wait, bring this back to the Electra paradox for a second, the brother we started with.
Let's look at Electra again. Even if she doesn't recognize Orestes physically, even if she can't identify his face in that moment, the fundamental relationship of brother and sister still exists. The thou is real, even if the face is temporarily unrecognized.
So we can acknowledge God. We can say thou without needing to see his ID card. We can fully operate within the relationship without having all the scientific data lined up.
Yes. We can acknowledge who God is to us, creator, sustainer, and who we are to him, creation, even if the eyes of identity, the specific formulation of who God actually is, remains a total mystery.
It seems like Samraj is saying that the mystery isn't a bug in the system, it's a feature. It's the very thing that makes the relationship meaningful in the first place.
That is a very astute way to put it. The essence of God is enough to ground our belief. Logic gets us that far. But the lack of identity is what grounds our freedom.
So let's bring this all back home. We started with the missing brother and ended up with the freedom of the human soul. What a ride today.
It really is. We moved all the way from the basic logic of something rather than nothing. The idea that the universe demands a creator to the realization that this logic has hard limits. It can give us a what, but it simply cannot give us a who.
And we realized that this gap, this inability to distinguish God from a lineup, is actually what preserves the entire nature of belief. If we had the DNA of God, belief would just evaporate into mere knowledge.
And that is the final provocation I really want to leave you with today, something that lingers long after you read Samraj's work. We spend so much of our time asking for signs, for proof, for God to somehow just show himself. We constantly want the burning bush. We want the loud voice from the clouds.
We want the ID card. We want to see the paperwork.
We do. But consider this. If God's identity was fully empirically revealed, if we had the atomic number of the divine and could absolutely prove it in a lab, would you still be free?
That's heavy. If you knew for a fact 100% that God was watching and exactly who he was down to the atomic level, you couldn't really choose to love or trust him any more than you choose to obey gravity. You'd just be complying with basic physics. You'd be a robot.
Exactly. Perhaps the silence, the lack of identity, is exactly what preserves the profound dignity of the human choice. We aren't robots programmed to just automatically recognize the signal. We are free agents who must consciously decide to tune in.
So the next time you find yourself wondering why God doesn't just write his name in the clouds, maybe remember, he might be protecting your right to choose whether to look up or not.
A truly fascinating perspective on the limits of what we can know.
Thank you so much for walking us through this deep dive. It's definitely one of those topics that's going to keep me up at night in a good way.
My pleasure. It's always good to question the very foundations of what we believe.
And to you listening right now, thanks for diving in with us. Here is your homework for the week. Are you looking for proof of existence? Or are you actually looking for proof of identity? And does the difference really matter to you? Think about it. We'll catch you on the next deep dive.